Hans Günther, a German racial theorist, later known as the Racial Pope, introduced his theory in a book published in 1922, a theory that attempted to classify the people of Europe not through culture or history, but primarily through physical and biological characteristics. He divided Europeans into several racial categories based on traits such as height, skin color, eye and hair color, and even skull shape, creating groups he labeled Nordic, Mediterranean, Alpine, East Baltic, and several others, each of which he believed held a different position within European civilization. At the center of this hierarchy stood the Nordic race, which Günther described as more intelligent, more disciplined, braver, and more creative than all other racial groups, and which he claimed was the true source of Europe's civilization, cultural achievements, and historical dominance. According to his view, whenever Europe experienced decline, weakness, or crisis, the cause was not political instability or economic failure, but rather the dilution and reduction of what he called Nordic blood within the population. Günther described the ideal Nordic individual as tall, with fair skin, blonde hair, light-colored eyes, and an elongated skull, and he went so far as to argue that the blonder an individual was, the more intelligent, creative, and loyal to the nation that person would be. Ultimately, he concluded that any nation possessing a greater number of these traits should be considered a superior nation, an idea that today is widely recognized as an example of racial pseudoscience and ideological racism. In 1933, when the Nazi Party rose to power in Germany, Adolf Hitler began actively implementing these racial ideas as state policy, gradually introducing Günther's theories and similar racial texts into the German education system, where they were taught to children as scientific truth rather than ideology. Within the SS, Nordic traits became the primary criteria for selecting senior officers, as physical appearance was treated as evidence of racial value, loyalty, and leadership potential. Even marriage was no longer considered a private matter, since SS officers were required to receive official racial approval before they were allowed to marry, ensuring that their partners met the so-called Nordic standards. At the same time, German women were encouraged, and in many cases pressured, to marry men who were blonder, taller, and had light-colored eyes, all in the belief that this would increase the purity and quantity of Nordic traits within the population. In this broader racial project, Hitler also sought to use the 1936 Olympic Games as a powerful propaganda tool, intending to display what he believed to be the strength, discipline, and superiority of the so-called master race before the eyes of the entire world. An Olympic Games held in Berlin, carefully staged, politically controlled, and designed not merely as a sporting event, but as a global showcase for Nazi racial ideology. Hitler wanted to project a friendly and civilized image of Germany to the outside world, carefully masking the regime's true ideology behind spectacle, hospitality, and controlled appearances. As part of this effort, he ordered the construction of one of the largest and most impressive stadiums of its time, a monumental structure designed not only to host athletic competitions, but to symbolize strength, order, and modernity in the eyes of international visitors. At the same time, and only temporarily, the regime instructed that openly racist slogans and anti-Semitic signs targeting Jews be removed from streets, shop windows, and public spaces across the city, ensuring that foreign journalists and spectators would not witness the hatred that had already become embedded in everyday German life. 100-meter sprint, regarded as the ultimate test of speed, power, and athletic superiority. Hitler placed great confidence in German athletes to dominate this event, believing it would serve as a public confirmation of Nazi racial ideology, and he himself was present in the stadium, watching closely as the race unfolded before thousands of spectators and the eyes of the world. But something unexpected happened on the track when an African-American athlete, Jesse Owens, delivered a flawless and extraordinary performance, crossing the finish line first and claiming the gold medal. At first, the crowd was stunned, unable to comprehend how a black athlete, whom Nazi ideology classified as belonging to an inferior race descended from slaves, could defeat competitors who were presented as representatives of the so-called Nordic ideal. Yet moments later, the shock gave way to admiration, and the stadium gradually united in applause as spectators from different nations rose to cheer Jesse Owens' undeniable achievement. Owens himself later recalled that Hitler even acknowledged him with a gesture from the stands, and over the course of the Games, Jesse Owens went on to win 4 gold medals, becoming the most successful and celebrated athlete of the 1936 Olympic Games. After the Olympic Games ended, Jesse Owens returned to the United States, but instead of being welcomed as a national hero, he encountered a series of deeply painful realities that revealed the harsh truth of racial discrimination in his own country. Owens later described this contrast in his own words, saying that in Berlin, he was not forced to enter buses through the back door, that he could sit at the front of restaurants and eat freely, but that upon returning to America, he was once again required to board buses from the rear and dine in segregated establishments. In another striking reflection, he pointed out that while Hitler never shook his hand, the President of the United States did not shake his hand either, as Owens was never invited to the White House, even as white athletes were welcomed and celebrated. Owens went even further, stating that Hitler did not personally insult him, but that it was Franklin D. Roosevelt who ignored him entirely, failing to send even a congratulatory telegram after his historic achievements. These statements highlight the reality that systemic and deeply entrenched racism was firmly in place in the United States during that era, shaping everyday life, public spaces, and opportunities for African Americans. Jesse Owens himself believed that, on a personal level, he experienced more respectful treatment in Germany than he did in the United States, a claim that may seem shocking at first glance, but one that demands careful historical context rather than simple comparison. On one side stood Nazi Germany, a totalitarian regime whose racial propaganda was primarily directed against Jews, Slavic peoples, and other groups defined as racial or ideological enemies of the state, while on the other side stood the United States, where racism against Black Americans was deeply rooted in segregation, exclusion, and economic exploitation. While both systems were profoundly racist, their structures, targets, and purposes were not identical, and it is certain that for a Black individual living in America during that period, the daily experience of racism, humiliation, and restriction was often harsher, more constant, and more personal than anything Jesse Owens encountered during his brief stay in Nazi Germany. For many years, Germans had lived close to Jews and Slavic people, so the focus of their racism was mainly directed at these groups. In contrast, white Americans lived alongside Black and Native American communities, so racism in the United States was mostly aimed at them. While both Germany and the United States were deeply racist, the targets and daily realities of discrimination were different, shaped by history, society, and proximity to other communities. Thank you for joining us and listening. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Stay tuned for more videos coming soon.